Now that you've grown your culture, it is time to harvest it. In order to do this, you need to separate the water from the algae, and you're going to use centrifugation for the process. Take your culture and distribute it evenly into your centrifuge bottles. Remember when pouring into your centrifuge bottle that the liquid cannot be more than 75% of the overall height. Make sure that you balance the centrifuge bottles. This is extremely important, or you can disrupt the functioning of the centrifuge. When you balance it, make sure that the pointer is exactly down the middle of the black line. In order to balance your centrifuge bottles, since the media is the same in both bottles, you can use a pastor pipette. Do this slowly and carefully because one drop can make all the difference. Once you've balanced them perfectly, you're going to close the lids on the bottles, making sure that they are tight. You really do not want to lose your culture at this point. Load the cultures into the centrifuge, making sure that they are exactly across from each other. When you do this, also take note of the numbers in which you load the centrifuge bottles into. Once you're ready, you can call your instructor or TA over and they will run the centrifuge for you.
Once the centrifugation process is complete, you can now grab your centrifugation bottles. You will now see that your bottles have a pellet. Your next step is to remove the media and make sure you do not disturb the pellet. To remove the media, just use a beaker. Slowly pour the media into the beaker. Leaving your pellet behind. The next step is to resuspend the pellet. To do this, if you have media remaining in the bottle, you can use that, or you can use double distilled water. The double distilled water is on your bench in the shape of this bottle. Pour the double distilled water in, and now use your pastor pipette. Take up the water and drop the water onto the pellet. You will need to keep doing this until the pellet is completely resuspended. After a while, your pellet will now be resuspended. After your pellet is resuspended, the next step is to transfer it to 50 ml Falcon tubes. Now, it's important that these 50 ml Falcon tubes are weighed beforehand. Because after you centrifuge both of these Falcon tubes, you want to reweigh the dry algae that remains in order to determine how much mass you have. So, first let's transfer our resuspended pellet to the Falcon tubes. After you've taken your resuspended pellet and transfer it to the two 50 ml Falcon tubes, it's now time to balance the tubes. It's important that the tubes are balanced properly. or the centrifuge will not run properly. In this case, you can see that the right side is heavier than the left. It is okay to go ahead and add distilled water to the left side. At this point, our tubes are now balanced because the pointer is right down that black line. Next, you want to make sure that you put the cap back on the tube. Make sure it's nice and tight. Once both caps are on, you can now put the tubes into the centrifuge. When putting these tubes in, it's really important that since they are balanced, that the tubes are across from each other. It is also important that you remember the corresponding number for your tubes. Once this is done, you can inform your TA or instructor that you're ready to begin the centrifuge. Now, since your centrifugation has ended, you can take your tubes out. You'll see, just like using the centrifuge balls, that in these tubes you have a pellet again. In order for us to use this pellet, we have to remove the solution. To do that, untwist the cap, pour out your solution, making sure not to disturb the pellet. Once you've done that, your pellet is ready to go. The next step is to put the cap back on. Take your tube, put it in the freezer in order to dry freeze your pellet.
Remember guys, safety first. Don't forget your goggles, lab coat, gloves, proper footwear. Common sense might be a good asset too. Before coming into lab, make sure you read your lab. And when in doubt, always, always, always consult your TA. See you next time.